the Cadaver dog marked there, and also Keela, the blood-sniffing dog, human blood-sniffing dog. And they found blood underneath the tile.
That's for Andrea.
Are we going to post it today?
No.
We are.
There's my letter.
This is the apartment where 3-year-old Madeleine McCann was last seen alive. The small holiday flat in Praia da Luz that became the center of the world's most haunting mystery. Months after she vanished, investigators brought in 2 special dogs. One trained to smell human blood, the other trained to detect the scent of death. And the moment they stepped inside this room, everything changed. Both dogs began alerting, behind the sofa, near the wardrobe, even inside the family's rental car. Every bark echoed like a confession. To police, it was the closest thing to proof they'd ever had. To others, it was the biggest mistake of the entire investigation. Because if the dogs were right, it meant something unthinkable had happened inside this very home. And if they were wrong, it meant the whole world had been misled. This is the story of the Cadaver dogs, the DNA, and the evidence that shook the Madeleine McCann case forever. It was the summer of 2007, and the investigation into Madeleine's disappearance had reached a dead end. Weeks of searches, hundreds of interviews, and not a single trace of the missing child. So when British police offered specialized cadaver and blood dogs, trained by one of the UK's top handlers, Martin Grime, the Portuguese authorities agreed. If Madeleine was gone, these dogs were said to be able to smell what human eyes could no longer see. Their names were Eddie and Keela. Eddie was a cadaver dog, trained to detect the scent of human decomposition, even years after death. Keela was trained to locate traces of human blood so small they could escape any visual detection. In July 2007, both dogs arrived at the Ocean Club Resort in Praia da Luz. The mission was simple: to search every location linked to the McCanns and anyone involved in the case. But what happened over the next 48 hours would change the entire direction of the investigation. The first place the team entered was apartment 5A, the same small, cream-colored room where Madeleine had been sleeping that night in May. At first, the apartment was quiet. Then, within seconds, Eddie began to bark. The sound shattered the silence. He ran to the area behind the living room sofa, the corner closest to the window, and alerted again and again, refusing to move. When Keela, the blood dog, was brought in, she signaled in the exact same spot. 2 different dogs, 2 different training purposes, alerting to the same place. For investigators, it was chilling. If correct, it suggested that human blood, and possibly the scent of a body, had once been inside apartment 5A. The search continued. Eddie later alerted near the wardrobe in the parents' bedroom, and then, days later, to the boot of the McCanns' rented Renault Scenic, a car they had only hired weeks after Madeleine disappeared. To detectives, that detail was devastating. If the dogs were correct, it meant evidence had transferred to the vehicle long after the child went missing. Portuguese police believed they had finally found their breakthrough. But others, including British experts, urged caution. Dog alerts are indicators, not proof. They point to where evidence might be, but they don't explain what the scent means, or how it got there. Still, in that hot Algarve summer, the images of barking dogs inside apartment 5A became a symbol of hope for some and accusation for others. What those dogs detected would soon be tested in the lab, and that's when the story would grow darker, stranger, and even more divided. To understand what happened next, we have to step inside the science and the silence that followed. When the dogs finished their search, forensic technicians moved in. Samples were collected from every place the animals had alerted. Tiny fragments from behind the sofa, swabs from the floor, fibers from the car boot. Each sample was carefully sealed, labeled, and sent to the Forensic Science Service in Birmingham, England, one of the most advanced DNA labs in the world at the time. Days turned into weeks as the world waited. Headlines promised answers. DNA found in McCann car, screamed the newspapers. But when the official report arrived, it was far less certain than anyone expected. The lab confirmed traces of human DNA had been found, but the sample was mixed, containing genetic material from several people. Low quantity, partial profile, too degraded to isolate a single match. Statistically, there was a chance some alleles could match Madeleine's known DNA, but also a significant chance they could belong to someone else entirely. It wasn't proof, it was probability, and probability isn't justice. Still, those first rumors had already spread across every front page. Many believed the case was over, that the dogs had confirmed it, that the DNA had sealed it. But inside the investigation, doubts were growing. Experts explained that cadaver dogs don't detect a body itself. They detect the chemical compounds released during decomposition. The problem is, those compounds can linger for years, transfer through objects, and even be influenced by environmental factors like heat, humidity, or airflow. In other words, they point to a scent, not a story, and in this case, the story behind that scent was anything but clear. No human remains were ever found, no visible blood, and no laboratory result could conclusively prove that what the dogs reacted to belonged to Madeleine. Yet, for the Portuguese police, those alerts felt too specific to ignore. Behind the sofa, near the wardrobe, in the car, 3 separate locations connected only to one family. To them, this was no coincidence, but across the channel in Britain, skepticism grew. Even the dog handler, Martin Grime, insisted the dog's alerts should be treated as indicators only, not evidence of guilt. He repeated it in reports, in statements, and later in testimony. A dog's reaction is a starting point, not a conclusion. It was a subtle line, but it changed everything. Because while science hesitated, public opinion didn't. Television anchors, tabloids, and online forums began shaping their own verdicts. To some, the McCanns were victims of unthinkable tragedy. To others, the dogs had spoken the truth that science refused to confirm, and caught in the middle was a little girl who still hadn't been found. As the scientific reports trickled in, the story no longer belonged to the investigators. It belonged to the media. Every network, every newspaper, every headline twisted the uncertainty into something louder, simpler, and far more dangerous. The dogs found Madeleine. In reality, the reports said no such thing. But truth moves slowly. Rumor runs fast. Inside Portugal's Polícia Judiciária, frustration was boiling. The cadaver dog alerts and the DNA samples had reignited suspicion, not toward an unknown abductor, but toward the parents themselves. Detectives argued the pattern of the dog's alerts pointed to only one logical conclusion. To them, it explained everything: the lack of forced entry, the chaotic search, the inconsistencies in statements. By September 2007, just 4 months after the disappearance, Jerry and Kate McCann were declared arguidos, official suspects. The world turned on them overnight. Outside the apartment, tourists gathered with cameras. Reporters shouted questions through the gate. And behind closed doors, the couple who had begged the world to help find their daughter were now being asked if they had harmed her themselves. British investigators, operating separately under Operation Grange, disagreed. They urged restraint, pointing out that dog alerts alone could never prove a crime, and that the DNA evidence lacked statistical certainty. They reminded the Portuguese team that, without a body or a confession, the case was still circumstantial. But in the public eye, that nuance was lost. The barking of 2 dogs had become a narrative, and once that narrative took hold, it was almost impossible to undo. TV panels debated it nightly. Papers published timelines filled with half-truths and speculation, and online forums, for the first time in true crime history, turned the disappearance into a global obsession. People dissected every photograph, every facial expression, every word. It stopped being an investigation and became a spectacle. Months later, the McCanns were formally cleared of any wrongdoing, but the damage was done. The words cadaver dog and DNA had already been burned into public memory. symbols of suspicion that never fully faded. Meanwhile, the search for Madeleine continued. New suspects named, others dismissed. Endless theories spun from fragments of evidence. But through it all, one detail stayed frozen in time: the dogs barking inside that apartment. To some, those dogs had revealed the hidden truth. To others, they had exposed the danger of believing in certainty where none exists. Years later, the images of those dogs still echo through every documentary, every discussion, every theory. Two animals led into a quiet apartment. Their reactions forever frozen in grainy footage that millions have watched, debated, and misunderstood. Some call it the moment the case was lost. Others, the closest the world ever came to the truth. But science never stood still. Experts have since argued that cadaver dogs, while extraordinary, are not infallible. That scent can travel, objects can hold traces for months, and context is everything. Yet, despite every warning, that single night in Praia da Luz remains one of the most controversial moments in modern criminal history. Because whether you believe the dogs detected something real, or that it was a tragic misinterpretation, the outcome was the same. Suspicion replaced certainty, and the search for Madeleine drifted into noise. Nearly 2 decades later, the truth is still missing, just like the little girl whose name began it all. Were the cadaver dogs truly sensing what happened inside that apartment? Or did their alerts create one of the greatest misunderstandings in true crime history? Let me know what you believe in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories, untold truths, and the world's most haunting investigations.